I would also like to let everyone in attendance know we have muted and turned off your cameras. We will allow questions in the chat. More direction on this in a little bit. And if any Caltrans folks are out there, would you please disconnect from the VPN? This will allow to save some bandwidth. The meeting will still continue to run off of the VPN. Thank you very much. All right. We have a little over half already in the room, a couple more people still trickling in, but we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, this is the guideline workshop number 1 for the Clean California Local Grant Program, Cycle 2. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to start out by introducing you all to Jeannie Ward-Waller, who is our Caltrans Deputy Director of Planning and Modal Programs, who would like to say a few words to start out. Why don't you take it away, Jeannie?
Thank you, Misty. And I don't know if I would characterize this as people trickling in. It seems like they've been flooding in. So really just want to say how pleased I am to welcome so many of you from all around the state. The 800 people registering definitely indicates just how popular this program is and how excited you all are for the next cycle. So just we are too, and really appreciate you all engaging early as we start discussing the next round of Clean California. I also just want to start by appreciating my team, the team that leads this program in Caltrans Division of Local Assistance. They are doing an incredible job, and this program has been a huge lift, but I'm just very proud of all the work that they've been able to do. So we're about halfway through the first cycle of the Clean California Local Grant Program. But given just how popular this program has been all over the state and what a success it has already been, we're really pleased that the governor's office and legislature agreed to extend the program and add another $100 million to this local grant program. So with that additional funding, we're really pleased to share that we are going to have a second cycle. So that's what we're here to talk about today. This grant program, as you all know well, was really created with the purpose of transforming our local streets and public spaces into places truly of community pride, where people connect and hopefully don't want to litter in those public spaces. Through cycle 1, we were able to award many transformational projects that will reduce litter, beautify spaces, improve them, enhance public health as well as placemaking, and also advance equity for underserved communities across the state. And in cycle 2, we're going to continue to remain committed to those same goals of the program, but we also want to apply some of the lessons learned in cycle 1. We had to move really quickly on cycle 1 because of the legislative deadline. So we know we definitely learned a lot, and we also want to get input from you on how to make this program work better for all of you. So particularly, we want to make this program much easier for local agencies as well as tribal governments to participate in. So key purpose of this workshop is to hear from you about your experience and your ideas for how we can make it easier for you to participate in cycle 2. Really just appreciate your interest as we start to embark on the guidelines update and application, and appreciated the feedback the last time. We had a number of workshops, but really we rely on that to make improvements to the program. So thank you again for being here today. And with that, I'll pass it to Dee Lamb, our Division Chief of Local Assistance here at Caltrans headquarters.
Thanks so much, Jeannie. I really appreciate our local grants team. So Gretchen and the team here for everything you do. And with that, just piggybacking on what Jeannie mentioned in regards to cycle 1 being able to fund such great transformative projects, we awarded about 105 projects that are already making meaningful changes throughout our communities. Again, that is the crux, right, of a program like Clean California. It really touches the heart of different communities, and we look forward to that same touch points for Cycle 2. So just to highlight a couple or a few of these projects, the City of Rio Dell for their Eel River Trail project. So that created a new shared use path along the west bank of the Eel River in the city, which is a severely disadvantaged community in Humboldt County. Another project was the City of Kerman, and that's for their downtown corridor revitalization project. That project there will provide wayfinding signage, 50 street trees, 2 murals along their Kerman's Main Street. The last one here that I'll tag, again, this is just a few of the 105 that are just completely transformational for our communities, is the Fort Independence Indian community, and that's for the Oak Creek Community Park. And then this project will construct a new port on the Fort Independence Indian Communities Reservation. Very unique in that it will embrace the tribe's history and culture. It'll feature green infrastructure, playgrounds, restrooms, trails, just pivotal to the community there. Okay, so do want to mention that these projects vary greatly in size, scope, location, and the community served. We definitely learned that from Cycle 1, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot of that in Cycle 2. But definitely the diversity, of course, is again another important factor, right? Do want to remind that they all serve the same goals: decrease waste, beautify public spaces, increase public health, and that sense of place, especially for our underserved community members and for all. So in Cycle 2, we want to continue these award types and projects. I'm excited. I know the group's excited. I know all you listening out there with such a huge interest are excited as well. Now, we do acknowledge devil's in the details, right? And so this level of outreach and many more, we definitely want to bring to you. Through these workshops and be, ears and eyes open for several others that we have planned in the future. We'll be listening to your feedback of how to make Cycle 2 easier and get organizations engaged. We had various listening sessions from the last engagement. We will continue to do so for Cycle 2. Inspired again by the communities and the partnerships in Cycle 1. I know there will be continued collaboration in Cycle 2. I won't say much more. We've got a packed agenda for you, the discussion, the dialogue, and the chats and things that the team will manage accordingly will be very vital. I think with that, over to our Office Chief of Clean California Local Grant Program in our Division of Local Assistance. I will pass that over to you, Gretchen. Thanks again so much for everything.
Well, thank you, Dee Jeannie, for kicking us off. And yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Gretchen Chavez. I'm the Office Chief and Division of Local Assistance for this program. Just want to say a big thank you again to all of you who are participating today, because it really, as Dee and Jeannie talked about, it's your participation, your comments, they're going to make this program workable. And we want it to be workable for you guys, not just for what we need to get accomplished. So big thank you for being here today and sharing your thoughts as we move forward. Quick introduction to the team. We have Misty Bradshaw on the team who's going to be moderating today, making sure that we're on track and everything's moving forward. Emily Gibson is leading Cycle 2. She's going to talk through the guidelines and certain parts of it, and then we're going to take comments. And behind the scenes, we have Monica Zagovia, and we have Denise Alcorisa, and Rachel Padilla, who are making sure that the chat's functioning, the polls work, and making sure they're all running on time. And also a big thanks to some of our IT team who are also in the background, making sure that this goes off without a flaw. And I'll tell you, we have over 800 people who are registered for today's workshop. So it is quite a large workshop. And if we do have any little glitches, please bear with us. We'll work through that. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Misty, who's going to walk us through the day.
Thanks, Gretchen, and thanks to everyone here in attendance today. We do have a nice packed agenda. We're excited to share this with you. As Gretchen mentioned, we had 800 people registered, and we right now have over 500 people of you have joined already today. So that is a great turnout. Part of a little bit of housekeeping here, we're going to have our discussion focus in kind of a couple of sections from our guidelines. We'll have eligibility, definitions of underserved communities, local match requirement, scoring criteria, and competitive projects. We mainly want to know if these sections in the draft guidelines about these topics are clear and helpful, and if we are avoiding any unintended consequences. In our next workshop, which will be held in December, we'll be covering other topics such as grant administration requirements, the application process, evaluation, award, and the RGA execution process. Also, we'll be covering invoicing and reporting criteria and requirements at that later workshop date. If there's something today that you have questions or feedback on that is not discussed during the workshop, please email us at cleanca.localgrant@dot.ca.gov. We also have that email address located at the bottom of every slide. Hopefully we can get that put into the chat for you as well. During this workshop, due to the number of participants here today, we won't be able to respond to the raised hand or the unmute or to be able to unmute people to speak. But we are encouraging you all, when prompted, to please submit your questions or comments in the chat. The chat can be found at the top center of your screen with a little chat bubble and the word chat. Please type in at the bottom right, depending on how your Teams is configured, your question and hit the enter button or the little arrow, and that will send the chat questions to us and we will compile those. During this webinar, we will respond to as many questions as possible as time allows. We will also develop a frequently asked questions or FAQ based on the questions submitted, and we'll post that on our internet page. In general, the format of the workshop is going to follow the basic layout of we will present to you materials, we'll then ask you a couple of polling questions, and we'll ask you then at that time to submit your questions in the chat about the topics that were just presented to you. Waiting for the prompt to submit will help us keep track of the questions that are asked, and we may find it easier then to type your questions during the presentation slides. Then you can always click enter as soon as you are prompted. We will answer as many questions as time permits, and we will repeat this process through the various topics until the end of the presentation. So with that, we are also going to start with our first polling question today. So I would like to ask you all, who are you? Who is participating today? Are you a member of a transportation agency? Are you representing a local agency? Are you a tribal representative? Are you representing a nonprofit organization? Are you a consultant that might be working with a couple of the above mentioned agencies? Are you Caltrans, or are you other? We would really appreciate it if you can click your selection button and hit submit, and we'll share those poll results for you shortly. All right, well, thank you so much everyone for putting in some answers. I'm seeing some responses generate in. We got about half of you have responded. That's great. I think we can close the poll now. Seems we have a lot of representatives from a local agency. About 68% of you, or 69 now, are from a local agency. That's kind of what we expected to see today, you know, but we're really excited we saw a couple of those other representatives. You know, we really want to reach a wide variety of people today. So thank you all for attending. All right, I'd like to turn the screen now over to our Office Chief Gretchen to continue on with one of our first topics of today's workshop. Thank you, Gretchen.
Thanks so much, Misty. Just want to reiterate some of the basics for the program. We had 4 legislative goals in cycle 1 that are carrying forward with cycle 2. I think you might have heard Jeannie mention that earlier. It's reducing the amount of waste and debris in public spaces. We want to beautify and improve public spaces, enhance public health, and cultural connection, and community placemaking, and advance equity for underserved communities through this program. So these were the same goals as cycle 1, and again, we're carrying those forward with cycle 2. So the budget for cycle 2, we already talked a little bit about, is approximately $100 million. We anticipate the project sizes to be a maximum of $3 million. We're going to suggest that throughout the guideline workshops and the application workshops about selecting a size of project that meets the project delivery deadline, and that based on our experience with cycle 1 is probably going to be a maximum around $3 million. So we'll talk more about that through the next workshops, but we want folks to keep that in mind as you're thinking about what you might be able to do in your communities. So again, we have very tight deadlines for cycle 2, a little bit tighter than cycle 1. And again, we'll talk about that more in the program as we move forward. Just want to give you a draft timeline for what's happening for cycle 2. So we have our second workshop following this one will be in December. And no, we have not sent those invitations out yet. They should go out in the next couple of weeks. We're anticipating our call for projects in January of 2023. We will hold application workshops just like we did in cycle 1, and that will help answer questions and explain how the application works. The applications will be due April, and then we'll announce awards in August, September of 2023. That announcement will coincide with the adoption of the state budget, and that's when the funds for this program will be made available, is in the fiscal year 23-24 state budget. The project completion deadline for this program will be a hard stop of June 2026. And again, we'll keep reiterating that through the workshops, but that is definitely a hard stop we want you to be aware of. And with that, I'm going to invite Misty back, who's going to walk us through another poll question.
All right. Well, we got a couple of responses saying they couldn't see the poll pop up. So can I just get a thumbs up from everyone that they can see the poll question pop up? Okay, great. All right, well, I'm going to ask it then. What is the anticipated size of the project your organization will be applying for? Will you be applying for a grant for less than $1 million? $1 million to $2 million? Or $2 million to $3 million? And it's okay if you don't know at this time. Maybe you can make a best guess of what you would like to use this money for, what size project you would like this to be applied to. Let's see, what are people saying? Oh, did it not launch? Here we go. So sorry about that. Sometimes there's a little lag coming through, but oh yeah, we're getting some good responses. We have almost 200 people responding here. A lot of you looking at some large size projects, the 2 million to 3 million, but we're actually getting a fairly even distribution here. We'll give it just another few seconds. I heard
Misty,
I'm
sorry, just gonna pop. I was seeing a few folks saying they might not have permission to view the polls, and I don't know if that's something in their, if there's something they have to enable on their end, or if that's something our IT folks could address in the chat.
Thanks,
We'll
Gretchen. Sorry
definitely
about
make
that.
sure to investigate that though before the next workshop. So sorry about that.
Thank you. And for those who are continuing to submit your responses in the poll, we really appreciate that. Apologize for those of you who are unable to. All right, so we'll close that poll. And it looks like the majority of people have answered 2 million to 3 million is their estimated project size that they'll be applying for, which is actually really exciting, but it is a pretty even distribution there. All right. Thank you, everyone. And I think we are going to move on to our questions. So this is the prompt where we're going to ask you to submit into the chat any questions you may have had on some of the topics that were discussed: legislative goals, budget, or timeline. We'll give you a few seconds to get those inserted in there. And I'm going to turn this over to Rachel. Have you been getting any good questions you'd like to ask our presenters today?
Misty, there is a question about if we can submit the same application for a project in cycle 2 that they submitted for cycle 1.
So I can try to answer that if you want. Absolutely. If you submitted a project for cycle 1 that was not selected for an award, you're free to submit that for cycle 2. However, you will need to make updates to that application information based on the changes for the cycle 2 program. We are also updating and changing the application format and form itself. So you're free to submit any projects that you want that meet those program goals.
Thank you, Gretchen. Rachel, did we have another question on this topic? Or Denise?
Let's see. We've got a lot of questions coming in. It says our agency will require a match amount. Does it have to come from general fund or can our match come from federal funds?
Well, that's a good question. And yes, you could use federal funds. However, I think you want to think very carefully through the project delivery process and what federalizing the project might mean to that deadline for project delivery. So we don't have very many restrictions on the types of funds that can be used for a local match. But I think you want to consider about any other funding source and how that might impact, again, the project delivery.
And I have another one if you can take another question. It says, does the project have to be shovel ready?
Well, that is also a good question. So I think the theme of some of this conversation is going to be project delivery deadline, that June 30th of 2026. And that, just so everyone knows, the funding for this program comes from the state general fund, and there is a sunset date on those funds, which is fiscal year 26-27. That is why the projects have to be delivered by June 30th, 2026. It allows time for project closeout and final invoicing and paying of those invoices before those funds revert. Because the funds revert, that means it is a really hard stop on those projects. We will have, once they revert, we have absolutely no way of paying invoices. So I want people to be really paying attention to the project size that they're looking to fund for this program. Make sure that they can be delivered and we can close them out. Between the closeout will be after the June 30th, 2026. But again, we will not have an opportunity to extend the life of those funds.
Thanks, Gretchen. I think due to time, we can move on to the next topic, but all these questions that are popping in on the chat are great. We will look through them and apply them towards our FAQs that we will be posting later. Thank you all for those great questions, and thank you, Gretchen, for answering them. I'm going to turn it over now to Emily Gibson, who's going to talk about our second topic of the workshop today. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you. Just wanted to say really quickly, sorry about all the issues with polling. So one of our IT folks on the call, Alina, just said in the chat, if you're unable to see the poll pop out, and if you're using a phone or a tablet for this meeting, it's possible that you might need to allow pop-ups on your device settings. So try that out and let us know if that works. And by the next workshop that we have in December, we'll get all this polling stuff sorted out so that everyone can participate. But thank you for the people that have been participating so far, and also the people that have been posting their comments in the chat. Okay, so I will go in and share my screen and go over the overview of the guidelines. Going to get set up here. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily Gibson. You might recognize me from some of the Cycle 1 workshops. Today, I'm really happy to give you an overview of the Cycle 2 draft program guidelines and to talk to you about our proposed improvements to them. I'm really proud of all the tremendous work that local agencies, tribes, and Caltrans completed and are continuing to do for Cycle 1. I'm also really excited to apply some of the lessons learned in Cycle 1 to this new cycle so that it's easier for all organizations to engage in the local grant program. While I'm going over the guidelines, I'm going to point out what we are proposing to change in Cycle 2. If there is a change that does not work for your organization, or if there is a potential change that maybe we didn't mention, please put your comments in the chat. Just a reminder, we won't be responding to raised hands. We're just going to be addressing comments in the chat. You can also email us after the presentation if you have a suggestion or question for us. Also, the draft guidelines are ready to view on our website under the Cycle 2 header. And our website URL is located at the bottom of each slide and also at the end of this presentation. So as far as eligibility, this is the same as in Cycle 1 largely. So eligible applicants are local or regional public agencies, transit agencies, or federally recognized tribal governments. Nonprofit organizations can partner with eligible applicants as sub-applicants. I just wanted to point out that Caltrans only enters into grant agreements with primary applicants. This means that primary applicants are responsible for all work completed by sub-applicants. And this is just something to think about when you're considering whether to have a sub-applicant on your project. For number of applications per agency, there's no cap on this, just like in Cycle 1. Something that is new in Cycle 2, though, is that you will be asked to identify your organization's priority application. So we're going to ask for this information because this will help us in our decision on which applications to award if more than one application from the same agency is competitive for funding. Also, we just don't want to make the mistake of choosing an application that maybe wasn't as much of a priority for your community. For project types, these are the same as in Cycle 1. They are infrastructure-related community litter abatement and beautification projects, and also non-infrastructure related community litter abatement events or educational programs. For the project area, the eligible project area is mostly the same as in Cycle 1. So eligible areas are public spaces such as local streets and roads, tribal lands, parks, pathways, and transit centers. Also, the applicant must have jurisdiction to make improvements to the project area. Ideally, the applicant would own the property, but if not, they should at least be able to provide written documentation from the property owner stating that they have permission to do work on the property. That can be produced upon request. Also, it's important to note that the property that the applicant doesn't own still has to be public. Private property is not an eligible project area for this program. Something new in Cycle 2 is that the project must be partially or fully located in an underserved community, and at least 75% of the population surrounding the project sites must be underserved. And we'll discuss definitions of underserved communities more later in the presentation. And by surrounding the project site, we mean the population residing in census tracts located within a half mile of the project sites. Some examples of eligible activities and expenses are amenities related to proper waste collection, such as trash cans or recycling bins, shade trees or art installations. I'm not going to read all of the eligible activities. In general, activities that meet any of the 4 legislative goals are eligible, unless they are explicitly stated as ineligible activities in the guidelines. This list here of eligible activities is not comprehensive. It's not possible to list everything that would be an eligible activity and would meet one of those 4 legislative goals, but these examples listed here should give you a good idea of the types of things that are eligible under this program and those that are not. So for those things that are not eligible for the program, that list is here. And this actually is comprehensive at the moment. There are not many ineligible activities under this program, which is great. So also the activities that are ineligible are the same as the ones in cycle 1 for this cycle, except stipends and gift cards for volunteers. We're proposing to make this ineligible because we've heard from our audits team that these types of expenses are particularly hard to track and justify under an audit. Another key ineligible activity is using the funds to displace people experiencing homelessness. This is actually stated in the enacting legislation for this program. Also, just like in cycle 1, acquisition of lands, vehicles, and shuttle programs are ineligible. And maintenance of a project improvement for this grant agreement is ineligible. However, it can be an in-kind contribution if it occurs prior to the project delivery deadline. Finally, work performed prior to the execution of the grant agreement with Caltrans or after the expiration of the grant agreement is ineligible for reimbursement. And now I will hand it over to Misty.
Thanks, Emily. We are entering into our 3rd polling question for those of you that have access to it. We are asking, does your organization have a project that is partially or fully located in an underserved community and at least 75% of the population surrounding the project site or sites is underserved? You can click yes, no, or maybe. Maybe you haven't looked that closely into it yet. Maybe you have a potential project you just need to consider more. We're getting some answers coming in. We got maybe about 1/3 of us have responded, but the majority is looking like so far that it's yes. That is great because that, as Emily mentioned, is one of the requirements to make it eligible. So if you're any of those that clicked no, maybe you can look back and see if you can perform the same project in a different area. Maybe there's a different way that you can look at your project where you can still meet these goals. All right, so we can close the poll now. Thank you very much. We actually got a lot of maybes on that one too, which is completely understandable. This is very early on in your planning. All right, and we will now move on to our questions. So please, if anyone has questions in the please enter into the chat on anything that was just talked about. That could be on eligible applicants, project types, eligible or ineligible activities. We'll give you a few seconds there to get some questions entered in. I'm going to turn this over to Denise to see if we have any questions in the chat that we can ask our presenters.
Thank you, Misty. Yeah, we do have one that's come in. It is, are the funds reimbursed after the project is complete, or can funds be requested prior or during design or construction phase?
So that's a great question. This is a reimbursable program, and so in general, you would invoice Caltrans for your eligible expenses, and then Caltrans would review that invoice, and if everything looks good, then we would approve it. And so you don't get reimbursed for everything at the end of the project. You don't get reimbursed for everything at the beginning of the project. You kind of get reimbursed as you make progress on the project.
Thanks,
Great.
Emily.
Thank you for that, Emily. Another question we have is, would cities that were awarded funding from cycle 1 be eligible to get funding from cycle 2?
Yeah, that's a great question. They are eligible to apply for cycle 2. The goal for cycle 2 is to award new projects. And so as long as the agency that was awarded in cycle 1 gets submits an application for a new project in cycle 2, that is totally eligible.
Great. Do we have time for another question, or do we need to move on?
No, we have time. We can ask probably about 2 more questions.
Okay. Are advances for projects an option?
So an advance payment is an option. We don't really talk about it during this presentation, but we can talk about it more during our next workshop. Information about advance payments are also included on the draft guidelines, which those are posted on our website right now. So be sure to check out that section of the draft guidelines. And if you have any questions, you can just email us.
Great. And it seems we're getting this the same question a few times of people are wanting to know what's the definition of an underserved community.
That's a great question. I'm going to be talking about that very shortly in the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Emily.
Sure.
We could probably squeeze in one more question, then those were answered pretty quickly. Do we have any others,
Okay.
Denise, or should we move
Yeah.
on?
How long does the reimbursement take?
Oh, that, it's not really a set amount.
So, well,
And-
I would say maybe, Emily, that we could phrase it this way. So typically, we require invoicing no less frequently than quarterly or biannually. And then once an invoice is submitted and it's a correct invoice, it takes approximately 45 to 60 days for it to be processed and paid through the state controller's office. But one of the keys is making sure that it's a complete invoice and all of the items are filled out correctly and it's ready to go.
Great. Thank you, Gretchen and Emily.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks so much. We'll close out our questions for this section, and we will now move on to our next topic. Emily, want to take it away?
Sure, yeah. So this is definitions of underserved communities. That was a great lead-in. Yeah, so in cycle 2, there are 4 different definitions of what is considered an underserved community. These definitions will be used by the applicants to determine 3 things. So one is their eligibility. Earlier, I said that the project must be fully or partially located in an underserved community, and at least 75% of the population surrounding the project sites needs to be underserved. The definitions will also be used when determining your local match requirement, which I will talk about shortly. And the definitions will be used to determine the application score for the project's relative population benefit to the community, which I'll discuss more later in the presentation. The draft guidelines go into more detail about each of these definitions, so be sure to review the underserved communities section of the guidelines for more information. But for now, I'll say that under option 1, if your community's area median income is less than 80% of the statewide median based on the most current census tract level data from the American Community Survey, then your community is considered underserved under that option. With option number 2, an underserved community is one that has been identified as among the most disadvantaged 25% in the state, according to the Cal EPA's Cal EnviroScreen 4.0 tool. Under option 3, the Healthy Places Index, a census tract must be in the 25th percentile or less to qualify as an underserved community. And under option 4, if your project is located within or partially within Native American tribal lands, it automatically qualifies as underserved. During cycle 1, data from the National School Lunch Program was one way to define your community as underserved, but we're removing it this cycle because in California this year, all students qualify for free lunch. So it's not really a good indicator anymore of whether your community is underserved. We're also going to be removing the other option because almost no one used it in cycle 1, and applicants can't use this option to calculate their local match requirement. Which leads me to the local match requirement. The required local match is the minimum percentage of the project's funding that the applicant commits to provide as a condition of accepting a program grant. It can range from 0% to 50% of the total grant amount request based on the severity of disadvantage of the communities surrounding the project. Tribes automatically qualify for 0% local match. The community surrounding the project is defined as all census tracts within a half-mile radius of the project sites. And I'm going to talk more about how to calculate the severity of disadvantage of your community in the next slide. So the severity of disadvantage of the surrounding community is defined in this calculation here. It's basically a weighted average of how disadvantaged the census tracts surrounding your project sites are. And so generally, this is calculated by taking the populations of census tracts located within a half-mile of your project sites, multiplying those by the scores that those tracts got using one of the 4 definitions of underserved communities, adding all of these products together, and then dividing by the population of all census tracts surrounding your project sites. For cycle 2, we're going to provide an Excel spreadsheet that will calculate this all for you based on the data that you've inputted. We're just showing you this calculation here and in the guidelines so that you have a general understanding of how the spreadsheet will ultimately generate the numbers that you see once we provide that spreadsheet. The key thing to keep in mind is that the required local match will decrease as the severity of disadvantage of the surrounding community increases. Also, this calculation method is essentially the same as it was in cycle 1, except we changed the radius of census tracts around the project site from a 1/4 mile to a 1/2 mile. And now there's 4 ways to define your community as underserved as opposed to 5 in cycle 1. Once you calculate the severity of disadvantage, you're going to reference table 2 in the guidelines to determine what exactly your local match requirement is. And there's an example of how to determine this in Appendix A.0 of the guidelines. So please review that and just let us know if you have any questions or suggestions. Excuse me. So for the sources that can be used to satisfy your local match requirement, those can be cash, third-party contributions, or a combination of these. Third-party in-kind contributions are typically goods and services donated from outside the primary applicant's agency. So examples include the value of donated plants, art materials, equipment. Please note that awardees will be held responsible for any local commitments at or above their minimum local match requirement as part of their grant agreement with Caltrans. This is true even if unforeseen price increases arise from events outside of the awardee's control, like inflation. And so for this reason, it's important for applicants to be conservative in their cost estimates and to include a decent contingency percentage when creating their scope, cost, and schedule. I think now we have a polling question.
We do. All right. If anyone would mind answering, does the community your project will serve meet one of the 4 definitions of underserved communities we discussed? As a reminder, those 4 definitions were either found by the area median income, utilizing the Cal Enviro Screen tool, the Healthy Places Index, or being located on Native American tribal lands. We'll give you a few seconds. Yeah, we got about a quarter of you responding to this. And we understand you may not know, you haven't looked into that in detail. So that is completely understandable, but we got a lot saying yes. We have about over half of you all have answered yes. That is great. Great. For the 4% that have answered no, maybe take a look into these 4 definitions and see if it can in fact fit your project. Give it another once over. But that is great response. 57% saying yes. I think we can close the poll now. Right. And we are going to move on to questions. So if any of you have any questions, please enter them into the chat regarding the topic that was just discussed in regards to definitions of underserved communities or calculating and requirement of your local match. Rachel, do we have any questions that have come in on these topics?
Hi, Misty. We do have a question. The question is, does the applicant need to meet all criteria of underserved communities or just one?
Okay, I think that means like, do they have to be considered underserved based on all 4 definitions? The answer is no. You just have to meet one of those definitions to be considered underserved. And let's say your agency ends up meeting more than one definition. Feel free to stick with the definition that maybe gives you the most favorable local match requirement, or that you can just best support. So yeah, definitely encourage applicants to look at all the definitions, see if they qualify, and then choose the best definition for their application.
So there's another question. Can you take another question?
Yes, we have time for a few more questions.
Okay. Can you count census tracts that are within half a mile of the project but located in another jurisdiction?
That's located like in maybe another county. I guess I can't really ask for a clarification right on the question. I'm sorry.
I think that's true. That's correct, Ellie. In cycle 1, it was the radius regardless of the jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think that is correct. And I think also as long as the project area that you're making improvements to is under your jurisdiction, then that's fine.
There's another question, if you can take another question.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you get more application points if local match is maximum 50%?
No, good question. But no, the local match requirement it's not a part of our selection criteria. Doesn't make you more competitive. What is part of our selection criteria is how underserved your community is. And the more underserved your community is, the less your local match requirement is. So kind of indirectly, the lower your local match requirement, the more competitive you are actually.
And I have one. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I have one last question.
Perfect. Go for it.
Will self-scoring still be in the Cycle 2 application?
No, we are getting rid of that, which is we're going to be talking about later in the presentation. It's a great question.
All right, so I guess that concludes our questions for this section. We are now going to move on to our next section on scoring criteria. Emily?
Thank you. Yeah, these questions are perfect lead-ins to my slides, so I'm really happy with them. So the previous question was, are self-assessments still part of the application process? And the answer is no. So in cycle 1, we had these 2 attachments. One was called demonstrated community need. The other was called project outcomes assessment. And in each of them, they were kind of quantitative self-assessments on how needed the project is in your community, and also what are the outcomes expected of your project in your community. In cycle 2, we're just going to have people explain the community need and the project's expected outcomes verbally in the narrative. We're actually going to ask you to write that out in the narrative. So another thing that we are going to change in the scoring criteria in cycle 2 is that we're focusing on the project's relative population benefit to underserved communities rather than the project's overall population benefit. And so all of these changes reduce the number of scoring components from 6 to 3, which means each component is worth a different amount than in cycle 1. And so you could see these new amounts on the slide here. And also we're hoping that less scoring components will simplify the application. Another way that we're thinking about streamlining the application is to host it through Smartsheets instead of people completing an application through Adobe. But we're going to discuss the application format and the process more in future workshops. That's just a little heads up. And so now I'll go into more detail about each scoring component. So for the narrative, this is the place in the application where you explain why this project is important to your community and why it deserves to be awarded. You'll be asked to discuss things like public engagement, project deliverability, and the maintenance plan for your project, among other topics. For public engagement, you'll be asked to describe what kinds of engagement activities were conducted for this project and how did they impact the selection or design of the project. And basically, the more that the engagement was focused on the proposed project and the more clearly the engagement influenced the project, the more competitive the project is. For deliverability, you'll be asked to talk about any potential risks for not delivering the project by the deadline and ways that you're thinking about mitigating those risks. For the maintenance plan, you'll be asked about the maintenance tasks that will be done after the grant period is over. And the more clear it is that this project will be maintained after the end of the grant agreement term, the more competitive the project is. Basically, we want to fund projects that are sustainable. As mentioned in cycle 2, you'll be asked to discuss the community need for your project and the expected outcomes of it in the narrative. And these descriptions of need and project outcomes should directly relate to the 4 goals of the program. And in general, we're going to ask for more detail in this attachment than we did in cycle 1. So for the project's relative population benefit, some background on this is that in cycle 1, we had 2 scoring components related to population benefit. The overall population benefit of the project and the project's relative population benefit to underserved communities. We heard from a lot of agencies that the first metric didn't accurately reflect a project's community benefit. Specifically, this metric made it hard for small, underserved rural communities to be competitive in this program. So based on that feedback, we're proposing to only keep the project's relative population benefit scoring component in this cycle. And the definition for this scoring component is how much of the population surrounding your project site is underserved relative to the total population surrounding your project site. Since this scoring component is relative, it doesn't matter how big the community that the project is serving is. What matters is how big the underserved community is relative to the total population that the project will benefit. And so if the total population that the project is benefiting is underserved, then your application would get full points for this. We also simplified the formula for this scoring component. It doesn't include any calculations for non-infrastructure work. So this also means that infrastructure projects are more competitive than non-infrastructure projects in this cycle. Also, we'll provide examples of how to calculate this scoring component in the next version of the guidelines. So for the scope, cost, and schedule, we're going to be asking for basically the same info as we did in cycle 1, but we really want to make the scope, cost, and schedule templates much easier to understand and fill out this round. Some things to think about when you're creating a schedule and also figuring out which projects to apply for are that if your project touches Caltrans right away, it might need an encroachment permit, and this can be really time consuming. Also, sometimes it's not clear what is Caltrans right of way. So if your project is near the state highway system, but not quite on it, we recommend contacting your district's Caltrans encroachment permit office as soon as possible to discuss if the project will actually touch our property and thus require a permit. We also recommend investigating if permits from other agencies such as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are needed for your project. Obtaining permits from federal agencies can take a particularly long time. And so in general, the most competitive projects will have all permits approved and in hand at the time of their application for this program. But at a minimum, they would need to discuss which permits are still outstanding and describe a realistic schedule for when they will be obtained in the narrative section of your application. Art projects on the state highway system, such as murals, need to go through the Caltrans transportation art process on top of the encroachment permit process. So art projects on the state highway system can take quite a bit of time. And then another thing to keep in mind with art projects, whether they're on the state highway system or not, is that they should all have maintenance agreements set up with artists, and this also takes some time to set up. You should also account for the time that is needed to bid and establish subcontracts when you're creating your schedule. And another thing that we have found in cycle 1 is that it takes about 6 months to process a grant agreement between Caltrans and an awardee for this program. And this needs to be accounted for in your schedule. So competitive projects. In addition to how well an application scores on the 3 components we just discussed, other factors can make an application more competitive. So these include projects that are more usable by the community and demonstrate a severity of need. Examples of projects that are generally not as usable are those on the state highway system. And when I say the state highway system, I'm talking about like a major freeway, not really a main street that also happens to be part of the state highway system. I'm also talking about medians and roundabouts. And compared to spaces like parks or local streets, these other spaces just aren't as accessible to the community, and they're kind of designed like that in most cases, not in all cases, but in a lot. So projects with tangible and lasting benefits, such as infrastructure projects, are more competitive than non-infrastructure projects. And as mentioned, shovel-ready projects with all permits in hand are more competitive. Finally, projects that are not near any other Clean California funded projects are more competitive just because we'd like to spread out the funding that we have. And also projects by agencies who didn't get funding in cycle 1 are more competitive. And so if you got funding in cycle 1, you are eligible to apply for this cycle, but keep in mind that agencies who weren't awarded in cycle 1 are a little more competitive this round. So I think we have a polling question now.
All right, everyone. What size project could your organization deliver in 24 months? Can you deliver a project that's less than 1 million, 1 million to 2 million, or 2 million to 3 million? This can be depending on your organization's resources, scope, and size of your project. So realistically, what can you expect to deliver in 24 months? Also keep in mind some of the timeframes and considerations Emily mentioned earlier in the presentation. If any of those requirements might delay or push back a delivery schedule for you. Okay, we are seeing a few answers come in. No less than a quarter of you, so I'll give it just a few more seconds. I once heard watching for these polls to come in, being like watching your popcorn. You know, it's like you're sitting there hearing the pop, 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 and you got to wait for it to slow down just enough and be like, okay, I can stop it now. All right. I think we can stop the poll now. We have the majority looking at a $2 million to $3 million project. So that seems like that might be a realistic size project to deliver in 24 months. So that's nice to hear. But we also see a good selection of less than $1 million and 1 to 2 million. So we're getting a good variety of projects, which is really good to see. I think we actually have a second poll question for this topic. So, is your agency considering a project on the state highway system? Is it yes, no, or maybe? So just some things to keep in mind for those of you who are clicking yes. Just keep in mind some of the encroachment permitting that you might have to go through, the additional time, and any other permitting that might go along with that. So there were some considerations that Emily mentioned previously. Oh, a lot of you are saying no, so that's going to keep a lot of the projects a lot simpler, but we do have a couple of yeses. So it is encouraged to look back through the guidelines, through the slides, and just kind of make sure you understand all the requirements you are going to have to meet if you are doing something that encroaches onto the state highway system. All right, I think we can close that poll. The majority have answered no. So almost 75%. Wow. All right, with that, we are now going to open it up to questions on this last topic that we just heard about. So please submit any questions in the chat regarding scoring criteria or competitive projects. And remember, we are not going to be answering the raised hand function, so please put your questions in the chat and we will respond to them as time allows. Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask, I believe it's Denise's turn. Do you have any questions for our presenters, Denise?
Thank you, Misty. Yes, one came in. Would your project be more competitive if it does encroach onto the state highway system?
Oh, you froze up a little bit there, Denise, but I think I got the question. It was, would your project be more competitive if it does encroach onto the state highway system? The answer is no, it would not be more competitive. It actually might be less competitive. And so projects that encroach onto the state highway system are eligible to apply. But if you're going to apply for a project that is on the state highway system, we strongly encourage you to start that encroachment permit process now, because it can take some time to go through that. And the most competitive projects that are on the state highway system will have either already started that process or they would have completed it by time of application. And so if you submit your application and you either haven't started that process or you're right in the beginning of the beginning phases of it, that's actually going to be a red flag for us, just because it can take time and that project delivery deadline cannot be extended, the June 30th, 2026 delivery deadline. So hopefully that answers your question. Good question.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Another question. Okay, if projects are in open space and is not located near an underserved community, but would improve resources for those communities, could this still be an applicable project?
So the project really needs to be located in or partially in an underserved community. We allowed projects to apply in cycle 1 that maybe weren't located in an underserved community but somehow benefited it. Since we have about a third of the funding available to us in this round, we really want to make sure during this cycle that the projects are going towards underserved communities. So, good question.
Great. Okay, we have another question. Can you
Oh, I think you can't hear you that well, Denise.
application for a project, but not to be, can you hear me okay now?
I can, yeah. Maybe Rachel can take over asking questions. I know there's some connectivity issues in your area right now.
I think the question she was trying to ask is, can you submit an application for a project that is under construction but not anticipated to be completed until May of 2024?
Yeah, that's totally eligible. Yeah, as long as the project will be constructed and the construction will be complete by June 30th of 2026. Yeah, that's an eligible project.
And just a reminder, I add to that, Emily, that those funds that are incurred prior to the execution of a grant agreement cannot be used as local match. So if it's an existing project that you're adding on to, you want to take that into consideration about how you're funding and what your local match might look like.
Is there time for another question?
Yes, we have time for a couple more questions.
Okay. There's a question, can non-infrastructure components make an application more competitive? Perhaps recycling, classes, pedestrian, bicycle safety, etc.
Good question. So I would say if those non-infrastructure events are paired with infrastructure components, that would be a competitive application. But a purely non-infrastructure project without any infrastructure in it is not as competitive in cycle 2 as an infrastructure project.
Thank you, Emily. I do have one more question. Are projects that need funding for CEQA eligible?
I would say that we're trying to prioritize projects that they've already gone through CEQA. They've already gone through their pre-construction activities. So I would say that a project that still needs to go through CEQA is eligible, but not as competitive in cycle 2. Would you agree with that, Gretchen?
Yeah, I would, Emily. I think that the key is even though pre-construction elements, except for right-of-way acquisition, it's an eligible expense. We don't say it's ineligible. The issue is going to be, can the project be delivered and the size of that project? And when we have what we've seen through cycle 1 and in other projects, if it's not shovel ready, there's a high risk the project can't be delivered. So if you're thinking of a project that does need environmental work, in order to be competitive, you'd have to really lay out in that application how you can meet project delivery and make sure that that's very clear in the application. But it would definitely cause pause for us to consider that project. I saw a quick question. I hope if it's okay if I can jump in. I thought it was a good question if I can. Somebody asked about micro grants and smaller grants, and I just wanted to point out that there's no minimum grant amount for this program. So, there's a maximum, but we don't have a minimum. So a project that's a couple $100,000 is just as competitive as a project that's $2 million. It depends on how well that project meets the guidelines for the program and shows a need for the community. So we don't want to dissuade people who have smaller projects from applying.
A great question. Thanks for jumping in on that, Gretchen. I think that takes us perfect timing to now go to our summary and next steps. Gretchen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So yeah, what are the summary and next steps? I'm going to say, summarizing what you've heard today, there's a few changes to cycle 2 from cycle 1. What we know is that everyone is much more experienced now in this program, including us, right? And so we want to try to make this program work. We want to try to make changes to it that work for you. What you've heard today are suggestions that we've put out there. I've seen some comments that were coming through in the chat that would make us maybe stop and consider whether or not some of those suggestions would really work or not. I want to encourage you to submit additional comments to the email address. It's at the bottom of the screen here, that cleanca.localgrants@dot.ca.gov. Please submit more comments. With hundreds of people attending these workshops, this is probably the most efficient way to have a conversation or at least present information. But we really want to stress that there is opportunity to provide feedback, and we still want to hear from you. So understanding that and those changes from cycle 2, also want to touch on the idea that cycle 2 comes with $100 million. So we have less funding available, and we understand that this will probably be a more competitive program. So really think carefully about the projects that you're interested in funding. Really focus on if they're achievable by that deadline, and looking at what's the impact going to be on the community. So we want to know that these projects are going to really make a difference. We saw lots of really nice projects in cycle 1, but perhaps there wasn't a severe need for that project in the community. So when we look at how we projects that are rewarding, we're trying to really support those communities that really need it the most. And also, look, I saw some comments about the simplifying the scoring and application process, and yeah, lots of pros and cons with that. And we continue to look at that and listen to your comments, and again, try to make something that's fair and reasonable for everyone across the board. So next steps. Again, submit additional questions to our email account. We're ready for those, and we really want to hear from you. in approximately a week, we're going to show, we'll be able to post this recording on our website, so you can go back and look at the recording. I believe the draft guidelines are already posted on the website, so please look at that and peruse through it and send us again comments to that email address. We will be sending out an announcement for workshop 2 in the next couple of weeks. So if you're here today, then you'll receive the announcement for workshop 2. But we also have a mailing list that you can sign up for on our website. And then as we refine the guidelines and we get questions from you through email or the chat today, we're going to use that to develop the FAQs for cycle 2. So again, want to make sure that I thank you all so much for participating today. I know it's an hour and a half out of your day, but we want to make sure again that we're making thoughtful updates to this program that are meaningful to you guys, not just to make our lives easier. It's really about what you guys need and about what the community needs. So milestones, again, we talked about this in the beginning, but just a recap, looking for our second guideline workshop in December. We'll do call for projects in January, and a call for projects means that the applications, the guidelines are all finalized, they're out there, they're ready for you to start working on your projects. We'll hold application workshops during January, February, March, and the applications will be due in April. We're going to again announce awards August, September of 2023, and that is to coincide with the funds being made available with the fiscal year 23-24 state budget. And then project completion is a hard stop again in June 2026, and that hard stop is based on availability of funds. These are not typical transportation funds. These are state of California general funds, and they do expire. So we want to make sure that projects can be completed and we can reimburse all eligible expenses to awardees prior to those funds being gone. So with that, I'm going to pass this back to Misty.
Thanks, Gretchen, and thanks, Emily, for presenting some amazing information out there for our stakeholders. For just a final reference for all of you out there, we have some important links here for our Clean California Local Grant Program webpage. From that webpage, you will also be able to join the mailing list. There is a link at the bottom of the page, and you will receive any of the email notifications or flyers that go out for any future updates on our program. There's also the overarching Clean California program, which our local grant program is a piece of. If you want to check out the larger Clean California program website, the website address is on the screen for you here as well. We've been dropping those into the chat throughout the presentation, so hopefully that'll be an easy way for you to direct yourself to the website. We actually have a few extra minutes, and I know some people have been logging off, but we're still recording. So for those of you who are still on, you get the lucky benefit of being able to maybe throw in a couple of extra questions into the chat, and maybe we'll have time to answer those for you before we have to end the recording and close out. So I will ask Rachel. Rachel, did you happen to see any good questions start to come in towards the end that we maybe can answer quickly before we close out?
I did see a lot of streetscape questions. So let's see. Can the project be design and then construction, say a street improvement project?
Sure, yeah, streetscape projects are eligible under this program. Yeah. I think I made a point earlier that projects on the state highway system are not as competitive. But that's just because those you can't walk along the side of a freeway, or in most cases bike along the side of a freeway. And so in general, those types of spaces they're not as usable as other streets, other local streets or parks. So yeah, hopefully people didn't take that comment to mean that streetscape projects are not eligible.
And that's a good point, Emily. And I'll add to that there are instances where a town's main street is also a state highway. And so those are also eligible project locations. So we want to make sure they know that that it does work, but we also know that there may be encroachment permits and issues involved with those types of projects. So if that applies to you, that situation where your Main Street and your highway are one and the same, reach out to your district Caltrans office and start conversations now about the likelihood that that project could be completed, or you can get through all permitting processes.
Do you have time for another question?
Yeah, I think we can do one more before we close out.
So the question is, can this grant supplement another grant on a project? I think did we have that question earlier?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, so this grant can be used in combination with other funding sources to deliver a project. You just need to make sure that you're not supplanting any funds when you're using our grant. But yeah, if you want to combine grants in order to implement the project, totally fine.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks so much for everyone who attended today. Thank you for our presenters, and thank you for the team who helped put this workshop together. This is the first step in helping us make sure that we are communicating with our stakeholders and we are considering your questions and your concerns and your thoughts on the program as we work towards finalizing some of these guidelines for you. So hope to see you all at our second guideline workshop. Date still to be determined. Join our mailing list from our website, and you will get those updates as they happen. Thank you very much, and we will be posting this recording to our website in the next week. So thank you very much, and we will now end the recording.
Thank you